might introduce yourself.
Well, I'm not sure if I introduce myself. I know who I am. They'll come after me. My name's Stan Broadway, N8VHL. I'm in Central Ohio SEC, also on the Hurricane Net, do some other stuff. I've been licensed since 1979. I'm a code extra, so I can pull a little snobbery off. What I want to do here is talk about something that we all absolutely know about, and I don't want to put myself out as an expert on any of this. I own an antenna analyzer, so that makes me an expert, right? We want to talk about NVIS antennas tonight and next week, near vertical incident skywave antennas. We've already been talking about those kind of things, and I'm sure that this is not going to be a foreign topic for everybody. I decided to do the bragging up front. We set up an NVIS day in Ohio back in 2015. It was kind of a new idea, and the purpose of this was to just get people on the air. The premises were to get together with a group, have some fun, try different antenna designs, research them ahead of time, determine how effective your coverage is from each antenna. It was a non-contest environment on 40 meters, and get prepared to use the best designs for go boxes, and take a minute or two in the middle of the day and fire up the barbecue grill and have some fun. Most of the time we did have fun with this. A lot of the old heads, now understand with amateur radio, there's a few universal things that strike our tone and wake us back up from the doldrums. And one of those is definitely messing with antennas, whether you're talking about 2 meters or 160 or below. And all of our people seem to have a great deal of fun with this. We did have over 100 stations on the air throughout Ohio. And we basically flooded 40 meters for the time, which is good. And then the front rolled across Ohio, and that kind of put the kibosh on some of it. Prior to the front, some of the guys in Cleveland off of Lake Erie were getting 30-degree weather with high winds. So they were not particularly happy with the date that we picked, but we wanted to put something together prior to the spring, prior to field day, so they could test the antennas that they tried and perhaps put them to use in some of their events. So after all of that, did we prove anything? Terrain, surroundings, construction, all of that can have an effect. Ohio is relatively flat. With that being the case, we were kind of hoping to get at least a consensus on what kind of antennas would be good. We did see a variety of antennas. Most frequently, we were based on the simple dipole. There were end feds, loops. Somebody even put together a Moxom on 40 that was aimed straight upward, which I thought was kind of interesting. It didn't do a bad job, but we were not able to produce any engineering level reports or charts or graphs citing any one NVIS antenna as being the best. So we decided to throw caution to the wind in 2016 and do it over again. Unfortunately, in 2016, it was also the launch of Parks on the Air, and they picked the same Saturday we did for their activity, and it just absolutely clobbered 40 meters. We did try to make an audible to switch to 80 meters. Not everybody heard. For those who did stick with it, it was a success. For 2017, we added the concept of anchor stations, where we had half a dozen stations that were on the air consistently through the day. And these are short days, 10 to 4, so that a station could try an antenna against 2 or 3 of these anchors, and then get a real specific signal report, then change antennas and hit the same anchors. So you have some kind of consistent wall to bounce your signal off of to see which one is actually performing the best for you. For 2018, we added digital communications, and we were pretty much committed to both 40 and 80 meters for that. 2019 and 2020 is the same. Now for 21, we're coming up on April 24th for our NVIS Day this year. We're planning to incorporate the Texas power down black sky version of NVIS. We've already pretty much got our antennas figured out. There's no reason to go back and redesign things. So what we're going to do this year is ask the guys to go out, do the same kind of thing, get together in a group, try any new designs you think of, but this time we're going to be using off-grid power, and we're going to try to establish a hierarchy of nets based on our districts in Ohio, and have the stations send a simple message once they get set up. In other words, instead of just randomly trying antenna signals, this idea of getting a message through while everything else is down makes it a little more challenging. So we think that's going to work. Now, you gotta love the Earth and the ionosphere. Couple of ways HF energy travels. You all know this. You should. Skywave bounces off the ionosphere. That's the particular wave of choice for me because I like DX. Ground wave is a localized pattern and gets you in close, but what about in between? One of the things that we first do when we try to build antennas as amateurs, we get our first license, the normal ham wisdom that all the old guys will tell us is, well, you got to put them up high. The higher, the better. No matter what's going on, you need the height. So the takeoff angle from a high antenna is lower to the horizon. It bounces further away. That makes sense, right? Well, when, there we go, anything too low and the radiation would go straight up, we used to derisively refer to that antenna as a cloud burner. But it turns out that's exactly what we need in NVIS work. Here's the juice. A low antenna height is helped by reflection from the Earth. The RF waves go almost straight upward. They bounce back down much closer to your originating station. Thus, it's possible to communicate with, say, within a state where you might not be able to get there on HF any other way. If there are hills, mountains, large cities in between, this is also a big plus. Who thought this stuff up? Well, it turns out back in World War II, the world was absolutely enamored with the Enigma Machine. You know, that's the one where they were coding messages and everybody got all excited when we were able to break the code and steal the machines and that kind of thing. Well, we were all huddled around the Enigma machines, even the mobile Enigma machines. We didn't happen to notice the tubes that were on top of the vehicle that was hauling those things around. And there were other instances of the same thing. Here's another example of World War II German NVIS antenna across the roof of this track vehicle. Here's another example of a communications vehicle giving a short-range signal, one that the idea is not only a short-range signal, by the way, but a signal that the enemy beyond that distance could not hear. And the US military still uses the NVIS concept. We used it in D-Day, we used it in Nam, and we're still using it even today on some of the vehicles. So the question is, can we talk? Are we able? Well, there's more involved to this than just the antenna. There is time of day, frequency. You need to be careful about the highest usable or lowest usable frequency. Not always the muff is what you want. Sometimes it's the opposite. Where we want to reach is a good indicator we have to watch, and what the layers are involved. The one layer that we're concerned with here is the D layer. It's the lowest layer of the ionosphere. The lower the signal frequency, the more D-layer attenuation takes place. It can be from 5 to 10 dB for each hop. Now, the D-layer is charged by sunlight and it disappears very quickly without the sunlight. During the daytime, D-layer reduces atmospheric noise and reduces the area the transmitted signal can be heard. Now, that's a good thing if you're after NVIS antenna, especially in a military environment where you don't particularly want the enemy further away off of the line to hear what you're saying. So the D-layer can be your friend. It can also reduce the noise so that you can hear stations that are closer into you. And another thing that I hadn't thought about, remember that you're aiming a signal. Sunlight fades from the east, so if you're aiming to the east, you want to choose a frequency and a time of day where the sunlight is still covering that area. In case of field day, you might notice that your signal shifts from some portions, say in Ohio, it might shift from Indiana over to Pennsylvania or such. Now, there's a lot of theory involved in NVIS. I'm not the guy to give that to you. You probably already know it anyway. But practically speaking, NVIS is considered anything lower than, say, a quarter wave. So at this case, an NVIS antenna, an 80-meter dipole that's 25 feet high, is still considered well into the NVIS range. But the kind of signal that you want to radiate from it is depicted in this horizontal image here, where you don't want it to shoot out flat. You want it to go up, and it'll cover hopefully within 400 or so miles. Now, if we drop that antenna to 5 feet off the ground, it's not magic. The signal is going to be weaker, and it's going to drop maybe from an S9 to an S7 because the ground absorbs more RF. Conductive ground reflects, poor ground absorbs. So it's not always the best thing to have an antenna that's 5 feet, 10 feet off the ground. Depending on what you're standing on, you might want to have it a little bit higher. The key is the stations you want to reach can hear you. Stations beyond that area, you probably don't care if they hear you or not. So over a reflective ground, you could get a 10 feet antenna, 10 feet off the ground, and it might be equal to a 25-foot dipole somewhere else. You can create a reflective ground as you're putting out NVIS antennas. You can sometimes add a wire, a counterpoise underneath the antenna at ground level. Sometimes we've had guys try putting dipoles over ponds or over bodies of water. Great reflection. So what have we done? This is short, but I don't want to get a textbook kind of thing going here because I'll put myself to sleep. We have now precisely and definitively structured our NVIS antenna theory, right? The concept is a lower antenna radiates straight up, covers hopefully within a 400-mile range. That's usually true, but I can tell you that sometimes it doesn't matter. We had a guy in Zanesville, which is about an hour-and-a-half drive east of Columbus. He had an NVIS antenna up. We were talking to him. Good signal, no problem. About an S5, S6, S7. He went home, put on his regular station dipole, which was up 70 feet, and was 10 over 9. So it's all relative, and we're really kind of picking at straws here because in a lot of cases, a regular antenna is going to work just fine for you. So you kind of have to, see what you have and where you are going to put it. One of the nice things about an NVIS antenna is that it can be very portable. Put it up in a parking lot, put it up over a field, whatever. And when everything is down, flat earth style, that's what you get. And that's when these things actually come up as a great winning antenna. So we found out here that the type of antenna what style it is, end fed, dipole, varies your success. The band that you choose varies your success. Time of day that you're on the air with this varies your success. The geography, if you've got flat ground, if you've got mountains, varies your success. Type of soil varies your success. If you put an artificial reflector underneath your antenna, it varies your success. Sometimes it works, sometimes it takes away. And your operating mode, if you're a sideband or if you're working digital or CW, varies your success. So go back to that first statement. Never mind. There really isn't a precise way to structure an NVIS theory other than experiment with it, try it out, see what works. But NVIS is a very successful approach to antennas. This is the all else fails banner. Everybody waves the banner when something goes wrong or when we need grants, etc. But more and more, it's getting rare that safety service radios fail. They're just much better hardened than they were when they first started out. The more brittle a system is, the harder it does fall when it does. Something to consider is the system doesn't have to fail to stop functioning properly. I think it was Frederick, I'm not sure, but within the last 4 or 5 years, there was a massive flooding as a result of a hurricane in Houston. Being a retired dispatcher, I was listening to Houston Fire's main channel. They happen to have one of the computer voicing systems where you put the run in the computer, click a button, and the computer itself spits out the address and what's going on. Well, that's fine under normal day-to-day activities, but there were so many requests for service, there were so many runs that the thing never shut up. And the fire engines were telling the fire chiefs, hey, we'll call you on a cell phone, we can't get through on the radio. So they were actually having to circumvent the radio system. Another problem is there were so many runs being given out into areas that were not accessible. Medics would turn the run down and they'd pop another run and it'd be into the same area. And the medic would have to come back on the air and say, guys, we can't get there, stop. So it doesn't have to fail to stop performing. Another more dramatic episode was Michael. I'm telling you, as from the hurricane net, Michael was a very interesting storm. All public systems were down. Radio networks that were able to quickly respond included a lot of HF stuff. Now, I don't know if Carl, I hope Carl's on here. We talked earlier. Carl Martin is the North Florida SEC, K4HBN. If you're there, Carl, unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about what happened down there with the HF, if you would.
You might not. I can give one story.
Go ahead.
There was a specific county EOC that before Michael really was cool towards amateur radio, and when they activated, they didn't have any hams in the EOC. They had all of their equipment stored in an outbuilding, or most of the equipment, including their satellite radios. The storm hit. They said, oh, we don't need the hams. We'll just go out and get our satellite radios. They went out to look for their satellite radios, and the outbuilding had been blown 4 miles away from them, including what was left of their satellite radios. All of the antennas on the roof of the EOC were also gone. So they were without internet and they were without hams, or without any communications. They had to send out the sheriff to get the hams. And of course, the hams showed up with their own equipment. They had their own antennas and they had their own radios, and they were able to make contact with SARnet, and they were able to make contact with the state EOC, and essentially saved the day for that particular county. But so they actually had in the Go kits inverted L's that they were able to set up for amateur HF, and they were able to make contact with the people outside of the county and get them help. It was pretty devastating, and it really opened up the people's eyes up there that, hey, when it does fail, hams can sometimes come in and save the day.
That's true. You're right. My friend James, WX4TV, I believe he was on here a week or 2 or 3 ago. He wound up at a shelter in a county up in the Panhandle and was using a mobile HF radio with a piece of coax that he'd wired as an antenna just to reach the other side of the county, like you said, Barry. And he passed a couple hundred messages in 4 days from the shelter over HF because there was really no other means of communication. In the Panhandle, the SARS stuff was all down, just like everything else. It was just flat.
Yep.
So, you know, that's not to say VHF wouldn't have worked, because that's fairly flat geography there. But you have to run what you brung. And man, the wire antennas are fairly easy to stick up. I have had a station in the Caribbean call in 105-mile-an-hour wind gusts with her antenna on the ground on 20 meters before. So they work, whether you're looking at NVIS or just regular emergency communications. So this is something to keep in mind. There are other geographic areas, I'm thinking like Alaska, where this is kind of critical. And it's a very effective way to handle that kind of broader distance over a lot of mountains, and line of sight just doesn't really exist. So NVIS antennas, I think this is like the non-learning event of the show here. NVIS antennas are something you need to keep in your toolbox. How many times have we heard that? But it's true. And once you figure out what works for you in your area, it might be several different kind of antennas. Could be long wire, could be inverted V, could be 2259, the military crossed wire antennas. We're going to talk about all of those next week. But you need to be able to do this. And one of the biggest shortcomings isn't so much the antenna anymore as the ability to construct antennas. The first year or two of our NVIS day, a lot of the old guys, the old heads, were busy telling the new hams how to wire an antenna together, how to measure it, how to cut it, how to solder it, how to build it from scratch. And man, I was thrilled to hear that, because that's really, really good stuff. I think Oscar can tell you that a lot of the stuff that went on after the storms involved knowing how to, you know, tie an antenna back up that had gotten knocked over, and find coax that would work and splice things and make them work again. Same kind of thing. If you have the tools, you've got to have the knowledge also in how to construct these antennas and try them out. Once you figure out kind of antennas, like a low altitude inverted V is a good kind of a universal thing. Roll it up, put it in your box, and we give people a chance to try them every year, and that's a cool thing. But NVIS is both overrated a little bit, because a good antenna is a good antenna. But on the other hand, when it's necessary to especially do something portable or in an emergency application, NVIS is really, really your friend. So how do we apply this little bit of NVIS theory that we learned? Well, we already knew it anyway. Cloud burner. And what are the normal antennas, and how well do they work? We're going to talk about that next week, and I will be more than happy to dodge any questions that you might have here. And I'm all about war stories. If you guys have antennas that you've used, and they failed, or antennas that you've used and they work, oh man, I want to hear them. I think everybody else would like that too. So we'll let Dan go back and open things up, if you will, and see what you think.
Okay, here I am. Right now I have you spotted, and Stan, I will unspot you so we can see and hear the people asking questions. And should have just happened.
You're spotted now.
Okay. For those that don't know, I think all of you should, but down at the bottom of your screen, right-hand side, it says reactions. When you click on that, it brings up different things you can do. You can raise your hand. That first one to the left side is raise your hand. Well, no, I'm gonna take that back. No, forgive me. It's the one at the very bottom where it says raise hand. When you do that, it will raise a hand. Tim's got his hand raised. And that flag says, well, now he's gone away. He's just playing with it. So you're welcome to put questions in the chat box. Hopefully you put a Q in front of it so we'll know it's a question, or raise your hand. And at this point, we will start taking questions.
Stuff in the chat. There was a comment about using pop-up antenna wires for 60, 70 feet long, up 10 to 12 feet, and or combo antennas with a coil, and trying to get out each hour to check them in a disaster. And Paul said that ice damage here recently destroyed many antenna wires. What can you do to put up in a hurry after a storm? Stan, you want to answer that?
Well, yeah, we kind of had that. We've had that in a couple of blizzard situations. The idea is there was another comment here about portable poles and things. There are a lot of us that are carting around the military mast kits. You don't really need that. My most effective antenna is, take away half of next week's thing, is a 2259. That's an 80 meter and 40 meter dipole inverted V. They're crossed. So 80's going one way, 40's going the other. Common coax feed. And it's only up maybe 15 feet at the center. And I just use garden stakes at the end of the wires to tie them down to the ground. So that's something you can literally carry around in the trunk of a car, and with a portable mast or a couple of those military masts that are just 4 feet each, that'll get you back on the air about as fast as anything I know of.
Okay. Another comment is, during the Loma Prieta earthquake, the county EOC in San Jose communicated with Santa Cruz over the hill with an Nvis antenna set on traffic cones. So that's an idea. And the traffic cones are bright yellow, so you can see them, so you can avoid the antenna, which is a good idea.
Yeah, they work great as antenna anchors. Again, if you're running an inverted V, have a little anywhere from 8 to 15 foot pole in the middle. You can tie the ends off to a cone, especially in a parking lot or something. And it's ideal. It's great.
Mm-hmm. I actually saw someone today that was showing off a slinky antenna. It's about 9 feet long when it's stored, but then it stretches out, and they have the bright yellow bungee cords with it. So when you string it up, you can see the antenna. It's a good idea. When you have this stuff, you have to be sure that it's safe and mark it out so people can see that there's an antenna there. Because sure as heck, if you don't, someone's going to trip over it.
Okay, 1 second. We do have 2 hands up. We'll get to you guys in a moment. Go ahead, Barry.
Okay, and let's see. I think we just about had someone check out East Coast amateur radio system on 40 meters daytime to get a good feel for Nvis propagation. Who can hear who? And it's interesting to observe it. And also a state QSO party is a good way to check out your Nvis antennas.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is there a good book on Nvis antennas that you know of?
I personally don't have one. I'm sure there are several. I have the old antenna book from, the big thick ARRL book, really address NVIS per se. Most of what I've used, I've just tried from other YouTubes and other states reports.
Okay.
I'll try to find one for next week.
Is there an algorithm or a software program that does a good approximation for various frequencies, time of day, sunspots, etc., for using an Nvis antenna?
Personally, I'd be afraid of trying EasyNet or one of those with NVIS because you're so close to the soil. There's almost no way of approximating the reflectivity of the soil or the terrain. And if you do, you go outside and look at your yard, then you're going to wind up 20 miles down the road with a whole different substrate. So I don't know that a software program would be able to take in all the variables that you're talking about. You just have to try them out.
Okay. Yeah, that's experiment. That's the whole thing. Go out and have fun.
Exactly. That's what makes it fun.
Yep, that's right. How much real estate does a 2259 take up?
Well, some of that depends on how high it is in the middle. I have essentially a regular half-wave 80-meter dipole. So you're talking 120 feet one direction, and half-wave 40 is 66 feet the other way. So it's a little bit large if you run it the way I've got it. There are a lot of diagrams and instructions available that work with, in the military, uses a shortened wire. So they're putting coils in at the feed point or some method of electrically shortening their wire runs. So you can break that down a lot less space than that.
Okay. There's a couple of good links in the chat for anyone that's looking for information on these kinds of antennas. But that's all the chat comments, Dan. So you want to go ahead and handle the hands?
You betcha. And we lost one of them. He must have got bored or hit his button again. But Jim, you're in there. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Okay, I'm kind of a newbie to this, and I didn't realize how hard it is to talk on HF between 50 and 150 miles. When I threw my antenna up in the tree, I was talking all over the place. I'm in New Jersey, so I was talking to Ohio, Virginia, Massachusetts, Canada, all over the country. But my friend in Pennsylvania or in the other counties in New Jersey, I couldn't reach. So I tried an inverted L end fed, and that reduced some of the range, and I was able to get it. And then somebody told me about this program about Nvis. So I've been trying to experiment with it, but I'm trying to learn how to build one. So hopefully in the future programs will be able to do that. My question, I guess, is what would be the best for that between 50 and 150 miles? And is an Nvis, is that fed from the middle, or is it at the end, or can you do either, or how's that work?
The answer to all of your questions is yes. Even the questions you didn't ask, the answer is yeah. You can put any kind of antenna together at NVIS. A lot of guys are using N-fed. We have a group of guys here in Ohio that like to go out to parks on the weekends and just light them up. And for the ease of mounting an antenna, just, putting it out, tying it to a tree and bringing it back to your camper, the N-fed is a really nice, convenient way to do it. Not quite as efficient an antenna as a dipole, but it works. A lot of guys are just using dipoles for this that are essentially just low slung, 5 to 10 feet to maybe 15 tops off the ground. And that's very simple to do. You just put a piece of, I don't even necessarily worry about any kind of balun or anything. I just hook the coax to either leg of the antenna and light it up. And it's just like the old days. And as long as your antenna is fairly resonant, you should have no trouble with what you're doing there.
Okay. Is there? Oh, wait a minute. We got another hand up. Hydrant, go ahead there. KC6YVD.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. It wasn't a question, it was just a comment that our local club president had a dipole up at, I don't know, 50 feet or so for several years. And his neighbor cut the tree down, and the tree came down and knocked his dipole down. And he went from S7 to S9 because his antenna was laying on the ground, and it just changed the whole way it sounded good.
You know, that's not outrageous. There are a lot of guys that will tell you that they have, especially like end-fed antennas, laid on the ground. Some of the guys have even tried underground antennas. I'm not sure I'd want to dig up my yard for that just to try it out, but in some cases, if you just lay the wire on the ground, it really works well. But again, that's not guaranteed. It more is a factor of the kind of soil content that you've got, but it actually does work. At the state EOC in Ohio, we have inverted V that's up about 15 feet from the ground. The ends are still up on top of a chain link fence because we don't like to get them mowed away. So they're maybe 6 to 8 feet off the ground. But we work pretty consistently within Ohio using that. It's still on 80 meters. It's well in the NVIS range. We have a problem, the band and the time of day thing. We have a problem, I'm sure most of you do too, on 80 and 40 with the winter season. Again, this is delayer stuff that goes away when the sun goes down. When the sun goes down earlier, the band goes long, as we say, which is really another way of just saying you don't have the skywave propagation that you do when the sun's up and the delayer's there. So we actually have to pretty much curtail our net over, say, from January to February, and then we start back. We're going to start back up here in another week, just to keep from banging our heads on the desk trying to get stations in Ohio. We've got guys in Virginia and Illinois that'll relay for us, and they do a great job. But if we had to, that's how we'd have to run it. But there's a lot more than, like I said, just the antenna, for at least for us here. Go ahead.
Okay, looks like we're going to Randy, KB6 NGT. Go ahead, Randy.
Okay, can you hear me?
Hear you fine.
Okay, the call sign is Whiskey Bravo 6, November Charlie Tango, and I'm here in Altadena. I have a 80-meter dipole, center fed, and inverted V. The high point is up about maybe 16, 17 feet. And then each leg is coming down to an insulator. And then from that insulator to the, to a ground stake. So each leg is coming down pretty close to ground. Do I need to change those legs to come up to be higher, like you said, 6 feet off the ground?
No, what you've got is nearly ideal. That's the same way I run my 2259. I just take a garden stake, and after the insulator, just a couple feet of rope, and just pound it in. You wouldn't want to necessarily put the end of the antenna right onto, say, a metal stake and into the ground, but no, right. You're not hurting anything there at all. You've got it figured out. How's it work for you?
Well, I have in San Diego, I can get pretty good. Like I say, I'm in Altadena, which is about maybe 90, 100 miles from San Diego. So I haven't really been out and put it through various other directions, but I am able to check into the nets in San Diego. And I was just wondering, yeah, it works. So I was just wondering was it really necessary to have it, maybe 6 feet above ground, like you said, to either a wooden fence or the top of a chain link fence. But it seems to
There's
work.
no real textbook on it. There really isn't a textbook on it. You can, if nothing else, try it. Try temporarily raising them a little bit, see if that improves your coverage, or it might degrade your coverage.
Yeah.
One of the things you want to figure out is, okay, where do I want to talk? Do I need to be able to send in an emergency? I need to be able to send a message to X, and then try your antenna so that you optimize it for that location. In that kind of situation, you don't really care about the other direction. So, there's something there.
Okay. Appreciate that, Stan. Thank you much.
Can you go over the east-west orientation of an Nvis antenna again, please? Someone is
Oh
asking.
boy. Well, yeah, the thing I never really paid too much attention to it, but I guess it's true. When the sun goes away, it's kind of the gray line theory applied to NVIS antenna, if you're familiar with the gray line. If you're not, you're not a DXer. So, you got to know where, for some reason, the sunset line is. I haven't yet figured that out, but I haven't really looked into it deeply. It'd probably be over my head anyway. But here, when you lose your daylight, what you're doing, your D layer is going to go away really quickly. So if you want to talk to a station that is east of you, you want to make sure that's going to hold on as the sun sets in the west. You're going to be able to hit them more if you want to talk west. In other words, you want to aim away from where the sun set. You want to get into that area first, where it goes down, your D layer goes away first, is where you want to make your first contacts and get that done before it goes away.
Okay. Let's see. And someone said the special forces, so they're not detected, put their antennas underground or right on the ground. And
Yeah.
their antennas work.
Yeah.
Can I jump in?
Sure, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I like to promote 60 meters as a good NVIS frequency. Oftentimes it fits right in where 40 and 80 don't work. And on field day, no one uses 60 meters. There's no contesting, etc. And the other advantage is you can use digital and voice on the same channel. So you can make the contact and then send the digital traffic without having to go to another band, part of the band for digital. Thanks.
Oh, Steve, don't get me started, man. If it just makes no sense to me that you can't do that on 80 meters. If I have an emergency net somewhere on 80 meters, I should be able to take check-ins by voice, send a message, get out of the message, go back to voice, just like 60 meters or 160. I mean, it just makes good sense. And 60 is a great avenue for that kind of thing. It's a smaller antenna than 80, of course, so you're saving real estate there. You could very easily do a 40 and 60 meter, cross dipole set, or just run a loop or something where you could tune both of them. The only downside to 60 is it's channelized and there aren't that many channels. So if you have a really big area, you're gonna be fighting for space. But I don't think that's ever happened yet, so that's good.
I
The real plus for 60, you can also contact interop. You can work with shares, and you can work with other government agencies that will get on 60 meters, and you can exchange messages with them.
Absolutely. Last 2 or 3 years, we've obtained permission ahead of time, but in our SET, we've crossed into FEMA and Mars and share stations all on 60, and it's worked really well. This year we did, this past October, we did iPause messages across 60, so it worked great.
Okay, I'd like to jump here for a second. Steve, this is not a slam at you, but please don't just jump in here. Raise your hand or put a text in because we get more than one people. We get people doubling, and that kind of makes a mess. Appreciate your question there, Steve. That was a good one.
Steve asked in the chat if he could speak, because he can't raise his hand. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he had a problem.
He is forgiven. I might make a couple of comments here. what I've done in the years past, a good friend of mine and I, we grew up together in amateur radio and everything. We got a commercial kite, actually ordered it out of Germany. And there was 3 models, and the one we got was the center one. If we'd gotten the biggest one, we asked the guy about the largest one. He says, what do you want to do, fly a car? They are like a big parachute. They go up, but you throw them in the air in a good windstorm and away they go. So we went out to the desert where there's lots of wind. We took a battery and a hot water 8 and a bunch of different wire antennas. And we did this on a field day weekend, because in field day, everybody's looking for a signal. You're going to get contacts and so forth that you wouldn't get most any other time. They leave you alone because your signal's too weak or somebody else is much stronger for whatever reason. We tried all different kinds of antennas. Of course, out in the desert, there's not a lot of ground. It's all sand and so forth. But we found out what the different antennas that work there. It's all about the ground. One antenna will work very good, and you move locations for whatever reason, and it won't work at all. I found that with verticals. I found it with wire antennas, beams, you name it. I've also seen situations where you've had like an 80 meter or a 40 meter dipole, and you stick another wire out there for 40 or 80 meters, the opposite on that. It picks up on the harmonic. It works great. It just works great. But a friend of mine tried the same thing at his place. Didn't work at all. So it is a trial and error. It's a lot of fun. Get out there and do it.
Someone in the chat, Paul from Oregon, said the benefit of an ICOM 7300, you can set the radio to voice lower sideband frequency. And if you use WinLink will automatically change the frequency to upper sideband digital for sending a message. And then the radio will switch back to voice. That's interesting to know.
It's amazing what these radios will do these days.
Yep.
Okay, anybody else got any questions out there? Oh, well, no, Mike, is that hand up? Looks like you're clapping, but maybe you need a hand, you've got a hand up. That looks like the clap figure. And there's the thumb up figure. He's pushing buttons. Okay, and then he's waving, clapping his hand too, it looks like.
Dan, on my machine, those are the only choices of hands.
Okay.
Oh,
I have a comment, if I may.
well, sure.
In our section, we've had a few people do some experimentation. We had a team go out experiment, and something Barry said, they've experimented with chalk line antenna wires, where their wire is coiled up inside of a chalk line holder that's used for putting chalk lines on roofs and construction projects and so on. And as they pull the chalk line out, they have yellow flags on it that they space every so many feet, but they come up with standard feet, and then they connect it over to the mobile rig that they're using and operate that, but then they vary the length. They figured out how to vary the length between 40 and 80 meters. Here again, most of them are doing over very wet areas and near the ocean, not too far inland. So, but they're doing well with that type of concept. They're also experimenting, and I don't know if Stan knows this, if they use on your end wire antennas, they're using 9-to-1 balance. So just throw that out there. Thank you.
There's a commercial antenna or two that are available that have, I don't know the names. I know you're nodding your head, Tommy. You probably do that. Just 2 spools, and you just pull the spools out and as far as you want to go. And those are something to consider also if you want to spend some money. It's more fun to make them.
Dennis from Oregon said that DX Engineering has info. It's a practical Nvis antenna for emergency or temporary communications, and I guess it's on their website and it's free to download.
Good info. when this is all done and I send out that follow-up, you guys be sure to go through, I'll include the chat because there's lots of links and lots of good information in this thing. So I'll be sure to send that out to everybody when this is done.
Someone also mentioned the GRA-50 military antenna.
Yeah, you could put a list that's pages long of antennas that are out there. And they've probably been tried and they probably work. And there's probably some ham somewhere that absolutely swears that that's the only antenna he'll ever use in his life, which is fine. If you put it in your backyard, you go, well, it doesn't work at all. So it's just part of the hobby. It's part of the fun.
In fact, I have taken a vertical Hustler 4TV vertical antenna, and I can make it a directional antenna just by adjusting the ground plane, just by adjusting the ground plane on it, and it is very directional. So you know, it's a lot to do with the ground around you, the ground plane itself, but the whole everything around you. About 100 miles from here is mineral country where we have a lot of silver, gold, and stuff like that. And you go over there, and VHF goes in and out like you can hear it. It's like a big wave, and it's very difficult.
Jen?
Applications. Yeah, go right ahead.
I'm fine. Congratulations about your schooling.
Oh, thanks.
That's a big deal. So yeah.
Whoops.
That was a whoops. That was on Dan. Little Dan did it to us again.
Well, you know, I think that if one thing you brought up, the difference between vertical and horizontal is much more pronounced with NVIS. If I have a horizontal antenna, I have my favorite antenna at home is a big 160 meter loop. And if I have a dipole, by the time it's bounced a couple of times off the F layer in a DX kind of thing, it's the horizontal versus vertical polarity, it kind of loses that. It begins to just kind of be a signal. But the more it bounces, the more it takes away that polarity. Okay, we're not talking about 35 bounces here. We're talking about one. So it makes a much bigger difference. If you have a vertical antenna, you're going to be 20 to 30 dB down from everybody else if they're horizontal. So now if I'm running my mobile HF radio, I'm hoping somebody's vertical so they can hear me. But you know, you have to standardize that within your group that, okay, make sure they're inverted V's, dipoles, whatever, and make sure you're not running vertical, because that'll clobber you in a weaker signal environment.
For any of the newer guys out there, you can see this a lot even with your handhelds by turning horizontal and vertical and the difference in the signal. I think something like a 3 dB gain or something like that on the VHF band there. Try that out. There's a big difference. So it depends on who you're trying to talk to, how far they are, and how good your ground is. Anybody else?
Someone said the Army uses whip antennas on their Humvees. They bend back in the opposite direction of the desired predominant direction, and it does well.
That'd be the Army.
Yep.
Okay, Robert, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the discussion of horizontal versus vertical. I have heard of people successfully communicating with a vertical on a vehicle, for example, NVIS. But yeah, you want to go horizontal if at all possible. And it's not even so much the polarization as it is the angle of incidence of the takeoff of the signal. A vertical has a low angle of takeoff, so you're going out across the earth instead of up towards the sky. But yeah, what the Army does with those is they're bending them back, so they're actually forming kind of an inverted U. And so there's a portion of the antenna that's actually horizontal, and it's sending the signal straight up. Plus, it's over a metal vehicle typically, and it's getting that as a ground to bounce the signal upward. So you could conceivably take If you've seen these setups that some hams have with the old, what is it, 102-inch whip and a tuner right at the base of the whip for HF, it works down to at least 40 meters, I know. If you bent that whip over, that might very well do pretty decently on NVIS, at least on the bands that it's capable of.
I think you're right. And James, again, he's got a video. If you guys want to see some cool after storm hamming, he took a piece of coax and cobbled it onto his mount on his Suburban, and then just tied it to a flagpole and raised it. So the antenna was actually at about not quite a 90-degree angle, or it's just up a little bit. And that's how he was making connection within the county that he was on to send messages. So it took a little bit of skill to just cobble that together and make it work. But it's exactly the same principle, Robert. It was a horizontal mobile antenna, if you will. It worked great.
Okay, Hydron, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention when taking the mobile vertical whip and bending it down, you have to be careful, especially if you got 500 watts under the back seat, because there's a heck of a spark runs from the tip of the wire down to the top of the roof of your vehicle, and you wonder what the heck is that noise.
Boom. Like anything else, I used to, when I had the vertical antenna, I'd had the kids that they would come over, and I would put a key down on my transmitter and go out with a light bulb, and I'd come close to the antenna, let that light bulb light up. I do it just as that's the day. Let those kids see that. So, no, hey, folks, don't mess with this antenna. It can really hurt you. You got 500 watts of that going out there, it can really burn you too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Barry?
Nothing in the chat right now. A lot of good links.
Yes, a lot of good links. So I'm going to be sure to get this stuff out to you folks. Okay, I don't see any more hands up. Well, the timing of this is not bad at all. You're doing great, Stan.
Hey, I've stretched it, man.
You're doing great. Folks, I want you all to come back next week because Stan's got some more. He's going to be a little, well, he gave you a little prelude of it, but he's got a lot more information for us next week. It should be a lot of fun. Okay, anybody else? I don't see anybody else. Barry?
Thank everybody for coming. It was great. We'll see everybody next week.
Yes, sir. And Tom, thank you for your input in all this. And folks, I'm going to pull the plug. Wish you all 73s and a good evening to you all.
73 swell.
Now, if you want to check back in after I close this out, I'll leave it open so you can talk amongst yourself and, you know, whatever. So just because I close the session doesn't mean that you can't get back in here. 73s, everybody.
Thank you all for coming.